28 Park Board meeting. Thanks for everybody to be here. And tonight we have a couple things on the agenda. We probably won't have Jeff here tonight because he's dealing with the budget this evening. And so Brian is going to be filling in and giving us a portion of the agenda. The three items that we're going to be talking about this evening are the dog park. We're kind of getting into the last meeting before we make a recommendation. And Brian's going to talk about the 2020 budget update, and Jennifer's going to talk a little bit about the site master plans. And that's pretty much where we're at. Everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes from last meeting. Any questions, comments, corrections? If not, can I have a motion to approve those?
So move.
Thank you.
Second it.
Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Minutes are approved. So, got a couple people here. Would anybody like to speak now on public comments, or do you want to wait till after presentations? You can't do both.
Because I'm going to leave.
Okay. That couch is looming.
The couch with the computer and a heck of a lot of work. That's one of those. So nothing as fun as ironing, which is what I tried to do today. Yeah, very thrilling. So my name's Connie Marsh, of course, and I guess my world right now is around the environment. And the Parks Department in your new Park Strategic Plan has proclaimed yourselves stewards of the environment. And so as I watched Confluence Park go through and saw things in Confluence Park that concerned me, and realized that there's a wetland that may or may not have supposedly been done and may or may not be being protected. And then I look at Tibbetts Valley Park, and we have a wetland that was supposed to be created for Tibbetts Valley Park, but the tennis courts are on it now. DSD has never been able to find that wetland that I have ever heard, and I've been looking now for, 6 or 8 months to figure out what happened to that wetland. And then we have the big field by I-90, that South Cove field, that is basically a huge wetland, but the Parks Department and Mount Sasan Greenway have been building trails in it without a permit, because you actually do have a critical area study done before you can build trails in a wetland. You don't know its buffers, you don't know all these things. And so as I watch the rest of our town, who you would think might impact the environment, like DSC Development Services, you would think maybe they would do something. Well, they're doing that on the other side. I'm thinking I shouldn't have to be watching the parks people impact the environment. And then I got the dog park plan. And again, the plan says that you don't have to protect the wetlands in the dog park if they don't require a buffer. But the law, state law, says that you cannot lose wetland. So if you do not fence wetland and you allow dogs in your wetland and people in your wetland, then you are losing your wetland, and you are not following state law nor our own SEPA code. And so it disturbs me that the people who I shouldn't be having to watch are continuing to follow this path of lack of concern for our critical areas. Because in my mind, this is our future. If we do not protect our natural spaces, we may not have space for very long on the planet, right? And it's our duty and obligation to be very sure that we protect these things. The animals, they can't speak. The fish, they can't speak. And so we have to go above and beyond to protect. I don't feel that you all as a board have been given an education in the environmental stewardship role that you were handed down in this park strategic plan. And so it would be very hard for you to make appropriate or accurate decisions on a plan, provided what you know. I would ask that you would ask for an education on the topic, so that when you look at your parks, you can understand what it means to have stormwater, what it means to have irrigation, what it means to have a wetland mitigation, and to have to maintain that in perpetuity, so that you know you will not be impacting it again and again, because that is the only way we are going to save our town, at least the environmental section of our town. So, yeah, I realize that was a tirade, but it was a heartfelt tirade. I just hope that you will pick it up and try to make it better, because I don't want to have to watch the Parks Department like I have to watch the Development Department, and I have had to, and I still see it happening. So anyway, onward, have fun. I'm going to go write some things. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Have fun.
Oh, joy.
Comments from either of you two now, or?
We'll wait
Okay.
after your meeting comments.
Okay. So, given that, I think, Jennifer, you're up.
Okay. Bear with me a minute, and I'll get connected here. Turn down.
I should say Jennifer and Sean.
Yeah.
You're both listed.
The whole park plan.
So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair, and hello, Park Board. As you know, we have been focused on the dog park for what seems like a long time, going through an entire process of site location, feasibility of site design, constructability, various forms of public engagement, and coming up with preliminary concepts. And tonight we'll discuss a proposed design. And tonight I thought it would be helpful to kind of go through the process we've been through to date. And then when we get to the portion that we talk about the public outreach that's been done, what some of the results were, and how that directly fed the proposed design that is with you tonight. Also, we recently had a Friends meeting that I'll share with you on, and then we'll talk about what some of the future steps are. So in your packet, you received this timeline, and for those of you at home, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this quite a bit so we can read it and start. That's a little too much. Start moving through this process. Hold on. One of the goals for tonight is to test the proposed design with the Park Board. We also tested it with our Friends group at the beginning of October. And also, there's anticipated action next month. And the question to the Park Board will be, do you want to proceed with construction of an off-leash dog park at Tibbetts Valley Park? And so today is going to be a revisiting of all of this information for you to be able to review in order to prep for a recommendation next month. So let's see here. Back in 2018, a budget was established for this project of $200,000. At that time, we did not have a site. We didn't know the size of the dog park. We didn't know what elements were available. We considered many locations, and also we hadn't engaged with the community yet as far as some of the features that they had wanted in the process. But one of the first things we did was start taking a look at how we can everyone read that, or do I need to blow it up a little more? Okay. So we started taking a look at the site selection process. We looked at existing parkland that the city owned. We looked at and explored 8 different sites. We went through an engagement period and had a meeting in August of 18, as well as an online survey to help deduce the various sites and the different complexities. One thing we learned through that process was no one site was perfect. Every site had its ism or its little nuance that made it special or unique or was a challenge. So with that, we continued through and we did some further engagement about what types of amenities you wanted in the dog park and what characteristics of a location would you prefer. Whoops, wrong way, sorry. Wrong toolbar. From there, we went through a little further evaluation of each of the sites, and we talked a little more in depth after that engagement about some of the site complexities, some encumbrances that sites may have, some of the challenges in developing some of the sites. And in November of 18, we also held another workshop in which the public recommended that we pursue Tibbetts Valley Park as a preferred site to continue doing feasibility at. At that time, there was a secondary site that was preferred, also selected, and that would be the old skate park site by the Issaquah Community Center. And then from there, we made another decision. We had 2 paths. If we chose no, the site would have, not to go with Tibbetts Valley Park. If we chose no, the site would have been removed and we would have started the site selection process over again. However, we chose yes, and we continued on to phase 2. And phase 2 started exploring some of the feasibility of the site. In January of 19, that's earlier this year, we hosted 2 walks and talks at the Tibbetts Valley Park site. And in January, the park board followed the community's recommendation and recommended pursuing feasibility at Tibbetts Valley Park. From there, staff worked with a consultant to do an existing conditions report, and we looked at existing tree inventory as well as some site hydrology. And we also entered into some preliminary discussions with the Development Services Department as to what our permitting path would look like. From there, we had yet another decision-making point, whether or not to continue with the site. If we didn't, the site would then be removed and we would start over, or to continue further feasibility and proceed to phase 3, which is starting to explore what site design would look like and some construction planning. So while this has been seemingly long process, you can also see where each of these decision points has brought us to either start over or continue down the path route, somewhat of an iterative process. In phase 3, we started feasibility with the site design and construction planning. We started to look at some site layouts and some things the community asked for, you know, as far as access in a shy dog area or a small dog area. Also some open area and what kind of overall constructability of that site would be. We developed 3 different concepts and began some community engagement, which we spoke about at our last meeting. And in those 3 concepts, we really started teasing out what level of development do you like. We posed 3 different concepts of 3 different degrees of development, as well as impact to the site and features. And we'll get into what some of the results were later. But we also, in this initial survey, we're teasing out some of the community's interest in wanting to be a friend of the group to both help with the constructability of this project as well as the ongoing stewardship in the future once the park is constructed. And then in October, we held a Friends meeting. And so we are kind of right here, and this is, should have said we are here, not a you, but a collective we are here. So before we continue on and start talking about the proposed design, we'll go back and we'll start to visit a little bit of what some of the feedback was from the community engagement on the 3 different concepts. You had received in your previous park board packet, and on the website, there's also a link to all 200 survey results for your reading pleasure. Some of the things we saw in that survey was, Concept A had the least amount of impact to the site. Concept B had a little bit more moderate impact to the site. And Concept C had all the bells and whistles and utilized the basketball court and had some other features like an agility course that people had asked for, as well as shelters to get out of the sun or the rain. Both Concept A and B were very favorable. Concept A received a 36% favorability, Concept B a 33% favorability. And while neither of them really superseded the other, because when you go through the comments and read, they like this and they like this concept but want to see more of this. And so in reviewing those, you'll see that the proposed design is really a lighter touch of both A and B blend combination with some of the desired features that the community has asked for, like a paw wash station, drinking fountain, trash receptacles, dog waste stations, multiple entrances, and so on and so forth. One of the design features we also heard is that people really liked both the natural feel of the Tibbetts Valley Park site. They liked the limited impact, but they also wanted an open area to be able to throw a ball and play fetch in. So while wanting that wooded experience, they still wanted some open space within there. We did hear they wanted multiple points of entry, keep an accessible route. There's a desire to remove invasive plants within the site, and something we will certainly continue to work on. And one of the overall, another thing that was of great concern to many of the respondents in the survey was the importance of 12th Avenue and what that visually looked like being next to a neighborhood, and making sure that that frontage and that presence on the street had an appealing neighborhood look. One of the other things in the survey that was talked about was surfacing. Wood chips was an overall preferred surfacing material. However, there were some concerns expressed about dogs getting splinters and other things, and so you'll see in the proposed design we've offered up a potential solution in an area for that, and we'd be open to the Parks Board's thoughts and comments on this. And also the fencing. While the wooden fences tend to be more favorable, some of them, like the dimensional wood and lumber versus a split rail, don't always lend that clean look along 12th Avenue that some of the neighbors were concerned about. And so also the short-term and long-term maintenance were taken into consideration. And so our proposed design is somewhat of a balance of those, and would like some additional feedback from the Park Board on that. One thing that was also really important in the feedback is people really wanted to keep the basketball court where it was. They thought it was a highly used asset at the park, and really wanted to keep that there. So all of that feedback and input has really helped take the two of the concepts, A and B, and merge them into a proposed concept that was in your packet, and we'll walk through it this evening. We also, before you received this, we took another iteration of the proposed design to the Friends group back in early October to get their ideas. Part of the purpose of gathering the Friends group has always been to help with a community build as part of this park. Knowing, as we do with every capital project, we seek grants, we apply for matching funds and other projects in order to stretch our dollars. We knew in this case with the dog park that community build was going to be a part of that ongoing work. So we started chatting with them about the design, the proposed design, what the level of engagement and interest would be in helping with that. Found it very interesting that there's a lot, we had 14 people attend that meeting, 3 of which were park board members. Brad was there, Marlene, and Ruben. So thank you for your attendance. And I think it was the 11 people that were there outside of park board were super excited about the dog park. And they cannot wait to get it done. And as we were gauging their level of interest, people were a little hesitant as to how much construction they were actually going to be able to do. So as we move forward, we've thought through this a little bit further as to what we think they'll be able to do rather than build fence, maybe spread more bark and do more planting and invasive removals, and maybe the fence along 12th Avenue, that gets hired out as by a contractor. But we'll get into that a little bit more here down the road. Let's see. So with the, when we met with the Friends group, we did make a few alterations to the design based upon some of the feedback received, and one of those was removed a few more trees to provide a little more open, clear space for ball throwing. And I'm trying to think what else. I think there was one other thing. Likely remember as we go through the design, so my apologies. So with that, I would like to show you, let's visit the proposed design as to what it looks like. So we'll start down here. Actually, before we do this, just to reorient everyone as to where the site is that we're looking at. This is SR 900 and 17th Avenue and Newport Way. And this is Tibbetts Valley Park here where all the baseball fields are. We're looking at developing a site right here. This is a gently sloped area of the park, and it has a steeper slope over on this side before it transitions down to the ball fields. This actually used to be a site of an old home in here, and there's some apple trees, as well as other plants in that area. So what we did is the parking lot would stay as is, and we'd create an accessible route to the main entrance of the dog park. One of the things we heard from the community engagement was how nice it would be to be able to wash paws as you exit and go to your car. So we have a paw wash station down at the bottom here. The basketball court remains as is. This unclassified wetland at the bottom of the hill, city code does not require a buffer on that, so that is recommended to stay as is right now. We have that accessible route that comes into a larger opening. Within each of the access points, you would have garbage cans, receptacles, and dog waste stations for bags and depositing of waste. We would also have an entrance that came off of 12th that would connect into this main access. We would have a shy dog area for small and shy dogs over in this area here. And then, as I mentioned before, some people were concerned about splintering or gravel, so we're proposing doing a sand gravel surfacing in this area of the dog park. We have several benches within and some new trees within the site, as well as some logs that could be either brought in or some trees that we may need to remove as part of the site clearing and development. We could leave them on site.
What is that area for then? Do you have the, wood chip area for running and stuff, and the gravel area, is that for
Same,
running, or is that
same,
thing?
much
But
like-
just two different textures?
Yep, two different textures and
So
surfaces.
if your dog doesn't like the wood chips, they can go with the sand and gravel, vice versa.
Mhm.
They don't like either, or.
Provide a different experience,
What's
right?
what's the shy dog?
That would be bark as well. Yeah,
Well,
you can
bark
tell
or
by
wood
the,
chips?
or wood chips, sorry.
That's something you need to bring up. You can continue on with the wood chips thing. I just don't really care much on that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever ran barefoot on wood chips, I mean, I don't think dogs would want to run on that.
So,
Sand or gravel.
yeah. We do we are retaining many existing trees on the site. However, there are a few that need to be removed, such as the apple trees. There are some dead and dying trees, and we would be taking a few other smaller trees in order to construct the site. But as you can tell, you would still have a nice wooded canopy feel within the park. To address some of the concerns about visuals to the neighborhood, the face of the fence that faces the parking lot, as well as all of that up and down 12th, we are recommending that that be a dimensional lumber fence, which visually looks more like a constructed cedar fence, a little more stately than some of the split rail. We are proposing around the mound in the middle of the dog park, using the split rail and chain link fencing around that. And then over on the back side, due to address some of the maintenance concerns and longevity, we are considering and proposing using a black chain link fence on that portion of the park. To address needs for a larger area for throwing the ball, we create a larger wood chip open area here for running. And to address people's needs to have walking paths, we are going to be clearing and barking some of the paths and trails within the park. We've also got another entrance a little higher up on 12th Street, so people coming down from the neighborhood would have an access point here. Again, a few logs scattered throughout. In this plan, I would like to emphasize that invasive species would be removed only in the developed areas of the park at this time, and we're looking at that would be the pathways and the open surfaced areas. Some of these other areas that may have invasive plants would be dealt with in future restoration efforts and future community events and friends efforts, and Mountains to Sound Greenway and other things that we do out. And also the Arts Commission is interested in contributing an art element to this project, and so we look forward to perhaps working with them and seeing what that would entail. These entrances would either be concrete or gravel and give a little transition zone right outside to dust the feet off before you start leaving the site. To address neighborhood concerns, we're proposing some street trees up and down 12th Avenue as well. And we would have one drinking fountain somewhat central here between two entry points and next to the Shy Dog Station. And this would have a dog bowl on it and a water bottle filler, which is what our new standard is. So it'd be addressing both the people need and the dog needs in the site. Yes?
Do you know, and maybe it's not this far along yet, but are there any kind of structures to keep the sand and gravel and the wood chips in the places that are sort of outlined? Because it seems like anytime I've seen sand or gravel or wood chips, they just go everywhere, especially if you have dogs making quick turns and stuff.
Yeah, so like in this area over here, there's likely an area that we would need to do transition, so not quite far along in the development, we could do a couple of little switchback design items to help transition that. Could be a couple of boards to help that get kicked out. Even maybe some rocks, that you could, flat rocks that people could then step on or do stairs or something in there. So yes, that is certainly something between those blending of surfaces we'd want to make sure to keep clean. But there's only small little areas that we'd need to do that.
I was thinking kind of along the edge where the wood's surfacing or the chips or the sand, gravel, like particularly what would keep the sand and gravel from washing right into the wetlands.
There's a lot of vegetation and slope that to deal with that. I don't
Okay.
think that would be an issue.
What's the reasoning not to have natural grass?
The wear and tear.
So you think dogs actually will tear up grass with
Yeah.
their paws?
Yeah, the Bark Park up in the Issaquah Highlands is a great example of that.
So for humans, like kids with cleats, what do you do in the Pacific Northwest? You use artificial turf. But we can't do that for dogs, can we? Probably not.
Actually, they do use artificial turf
Okay.
in some of the smaller dog parks. We were just in one that was all concrete. We've also been in one in some of the different apartments and things. Some of the smaller ones, they will.
Is there stuff like that?
They will
Because
use
you know,
artificial.
I think of dogs and they want to run on natural ground, and the chips and the sand, the gravel just really bother me. And that's just not. I mean, if I was a dog owner, I wouldn't want my dog running there. We've also heard from other people that places that have that kind of stuff, the dogs don't even go there. Because again, take off your shoes and go barefoot and go run through the stuff. And in this area here, you know, dogs are part of their family, and if they care about their dogs, they're not going to take them somewhere where they're going to, you know, even washing their paws off because they're bleeding. You know, I mean, not because they're dirty. But what alternative? You can't have natural grass. I mean, I think you got to have something that's
Well, the survey of
close to that.
Yeah, the survey of over 200, close to 200 respondents did state that the, wood chips were the preferred surfacing.
That's probably like a choice.
But
to have.
recognizing there was a desire to perhaps have another, we chose to provide a little bit of that, addressing both parties of concern.
But I think that's a real concern that I have, at least to be on this board, that I don't agree with any one of those surfaces at all. You know,
Well, we've also been trying to design to stay somewhat within our budget, and now when you start introducing materials like artificial turf, that really starts blowing the budget quite a bit.
That's kind of, the other thing with wood, I guess I mentioned this last time, picking up dog feces, you got those scooper boopers, and they flush with the ground and pick it up. Well, the wood chips ain't flush, so I mean, how do you do that? Plus, they urinate all over it. I mean, how do you maintain that? I mean, that's got to really be kind of bad after 2 years of dogs urinating all over wood chips. I think I wouldn't, isn't it kind
Well,
of?
you would have to go back in and start restoring.
At
and
what
it's-
time? I mean, do we know? I mean, it's got to be nasty. I mean, it could smell. It could be, I don't know. It could be.
Most dog parks in the area do have bark, and they're not.
But then again, we've heard also that a lot of people said a lot of dogs don't like using it. So to me, if that's true, it's such a real waste of time for us to implement something that people already see not working very well. But I mean, I just have a real concern about the ground plus the openness. There's no openness there. I think we need to find I know in the Pacific Northwest here, it's hard to find open land. So some of you know, I come from the Midwest, plenty of open land. It's all open land. Okay. Here it's hard for you guys to find that, but I had to throw a ball and the dog runs, hits a tree. I don't know. I hope that doesn't happen, but
Yep. Well, the design that's before you has been through is the culmination of a lot of community input and outreach efforts, and so we are coming to you with somewhat of a proposed design for final tweaking. It would be our goal that after tonight we would be sending out this preferred design to the community for one last echo of did we get it right? Any last items you would like to add? And so to address your concerns, we'll be receiving another round of input, and if people feel that the bark or the gravel is not necessary, they would have another opportunity to.
And so sometimes I wonder in surveys how much input you get. You had that friends meeting, and I'm not trying to be hard on here and stuff. They had 13 people. That's what 0.0001% of the population. You made a change on here based on those 13 people. Okay, that's great. 13 people. That's not many people.
Well, those are people that are willing to step up and be our community members and friends to help steward and maintain and construct.
It's not a whole lot of people. So I don't know if people who have been on here really get an idea of what is available to them other than what you're showing, maybe. But for myself, you can continue on, but for myself, I prefer the option of nixing this site and trying to fix something else. Because this is just, I don't think this is really a good area.
Well,
If I could add, just because I was at the meeting with the Friends Group, and I hear you that it wasn't a ton of people, but I would say maybe there was one person, maybe two, who were negative about this site. I would say the rest of them were very excited and actually proposed a lot of frustration if the park board decided to nix this site at this point. So I know it's fewer people, but what I would tell you is those engaged folks were really excited about the dog park being here at Tibbetts, and they did not express concerns that you're talking about as it relates to park.
But again, 13 people, you could have the same meeting a month later and have 13 people, and it could be the other way around. You have two that like it and 13 that don't. I mean, it's just 13 different people.
so did you?
So I'm just saying,
So all the survey results were sent out to the park board for review, and within those, there were very few comments that had explicit concerns about this site. I would say that carried forward into the Friends meeting, that the sentiment was very excited about this location.
well, I'm just sharing on being on park board. That's where I'm at. I'm not too excited about this site. Okay,
So be specific, Carl. When you say you don't approve of this site,
well, I don't
is
see a
it
real.
because of surfacing
I don't see
issues,
the surfacing. I don't like. I don't see a real open area. Dog park is like a big open area.
So
Not-
this
not
site
a-
is
not
2
a-
acres.
Not a narrow path type thing.
So this site is 2 acres. When
Well,
you zoom
know,
back out, let me,
How much of that is the wetlands in the center there? You know?
so, whoops, sorry, wrong way. So when you look at the dog park, everything within this outside perimeter fence, including the shy dog area, minus what is protected here with the mound in the interior wetland, you have over 2 acres.
But I mean, I guess I'm thinking about where I come from. Again, where you have a little more open land. But, your dog park isn't where you're going to go walking the dog like you're pushing a stroller. It's an open area for the dogs to run. So I don't care you got a bunch of paths there because you're not taking the dog on a walk like you're taking your kid on a walk.
I would. I think speaking
Well,
as
you
a dog owner
would, but you
who's
can
used
go
to a
walk
dog,
around the
I'm used to a
neighborhood
dog park
too on
like
the
this.
sidewalk and walk with your dog.
But he runs.
Dog park is for running. It's for exercise, not for just going place to walk. You can walk anywhere in the whole town.
So
with your
let's-
dog.
Well, yeah, and I think we can agree, there's a variety of options within the dog park, right? Which is why we're taking this to the public. I mean, this
Yeah.
isn't our personal opinions of what we think
Oh, I
it
know,
should
I
be.
know. Yeah.
Our job as the board is to listen to the community as a whole, right? Not certain segments, but everybody. And what's that general population telling us as we've taken this out, right? We're not holding firm that this is a site. We're taking it out to everything. That's why this process has developed the way it has. So I think we can acknowledge there's a variety of sites, variety of materials we could use, and that's why it's good. I think documented that, you've documented your opinion, and thank you for that. I think that's
Yeah.
good.
When I think of the other sites, I think of Veteran Memorial, look how open that is, and it's not used. I mean, it's wide open, and it's flat, there's nothing there. I mean, big area to run, and it's not used at all for nothing.
Again, as the board
Yeah, but
goes
it
through this
was-
process, we have decision points.
Yeah,
Right,
and
if that's-
and that's what Jeff mentioned last month, said that we haven't decided yet, and if we decide to say no, that you're gonna be okay with that. So,
Well, yeah,
Well,
who's gonna be
there's-
okay with that?
that you would be okay if we as a park board decide, no, we need to find a different site.
So let me continue through.
Because that hasn't been
somewhat of
decided
our-
yet, because I thought that was last month. And he says, well, no, it hasn't been, so.
No, we're covering
So
everything
let's-
now, and we'll discuss that coming up. Next month is the big decision point. That's when
Right.
we're gonna have those discussions.
And tonight, we're not asking for any decisions. We're asking for feedback on the proposed design that's going to go back out to the community. Answer any questions as you prepare to make a decision next month. But to go back and reiterate, let's go back through to the process. We're back in phase 3 here for those following at home, the feasibility of planning and construction. We talked about the UR here where we have this proposed design that we're going to be putting out online for additional feedback after we receive park board feedback tonight. We will continue to work on our budget. and the feasibility of the site, and based upon a community assistance and helping assist with the construction. And then we're going to have a decision point here in November, when your next meeting is, for the park board, and we're going to determine whether or not you want to pursue construction at this site. If it's a no option, you have two options. You can either, we can start this process back over and start the process with the feasibility of the second site, or we can start over and explore, start at phase one and go back and go through a whole new site selection process. We've been at this for about a year and a half now, and while that seems like a super long time, it's been super informed by the community, this process, both in the site selection process, the feasibility of the site, and the design input, people coming out to the site and doing walk and talks, so on and so forth. So this is what we're having conversation about tonight in order to help you make a decision next month. Let's say we say yes to the Tibbetts Valley site next month. Next steps is we would create a site development package that we would be submitting for permitting. We'd plan in a little more detail the phasing of construction relative to level of community input, and we'd proceed on to phase 4, which is construction in 2020. We'd go through our permitting processes here at the city, and we'd also start the construction, which is going to be a mix of both contracted work and community work parties with the city hosting. And then eventually, we will have a completed dog park and open to the community. So as we back out and look at this, as we back out and look at this process, we've come a very long way to get to where we're at with these proposed designs, and we're getting close to a decision point here. So with,
In the feasibility things that have come up so far, has anyone looked at kind of a hydrology and a stormwater flow throughout this site? I'm still concerned about the gravel and the wood chips just going everywhere and not staying in these. I mean, it looks so tidy on here, but I just feel like it's going to look kind of a mess when.
So when you go out on the site, there are actually two natural little benches and flat areas out there. The first, let me pull up the design here. So this area here is kind of that first. There's a gradual slope, but it is not steep. This whole site has about an average 12% to 8% slope on average from the very top up here down to the bottom, but cross slope going from 12th Avenue to the other side is very almost flat and somewhat gradual throughout the site. So this area up in here is a little more flat. There's a bit of a transition right in here, and this area is rather gradual as well at the base. So while this is an overall slope site, I am not concerned with these materials sliding off in heavy rain. The site would definitely be prepared to accommodate for those areas. Also, the steep slopes are over on this side of the park, and this fence would be placed at the top of the steep slope to protect both the steep slope and animals from going down it.
You know the wood chip surfacing area there, do you know approximately what size that is?
I don't have my dimensions with me right now.
Half an
but
acre maybe, or?
I don't have the dimensions with me, Carl. I'm
We
sorry.
can have that for you at the next meeting too.
Yeah.
Let you know how big that space that is.
Yeah.
On the entry that you have way up on 12th where neighbors may walk in, is it possible to consider putting another paw wash in there? Because they may want to get the wood chips or the sand off of their dogs before they take them out. And the parking lot is not huge, so there may be people that are parking up there that would like to have their dogs' paws a little clean before they got in the car.
Yeah. So there is no parking up in this area or along 12th in this space.
Yeah, but people might be parking on the side streets too.
True.
Blocking
Let's
their
hope not.
residents.
Let's hope not,
Yeah.
because there's ample parking at Tibbetts Valley. One of the reasons we didn't put water up here right now, that it could always be a future addition, is our water meter is actually down here. And in order to get piping up that elevation and run at a greater distance, it was easier for us to continue and tie in closer to a water line at this edge and in here than up there. But that is definitely, if that's something you would like to show in the proposed design, we're happy to add it.
I think definitely put on that list too, and we can even monitor and see how the usage goes, if this ends up being the site.
Well, but one
See how
thing I would
usage
like
goes.
to do, though, is if there's things for permitting processes, it would be easier to include it in the design now and phase it
Right.
in as a future addition, rather than try and come back at a
Right.
later date. So, if that's something the board would like to add, I'm happy to.
I would think, just speaking as sort of the neighbors in that area off to the side, I think we probably don't want to make it super easy to attract parking on the side when there is a lot of parking at Tibbetts. So I think, just speaking on sort of the other side of that coin, it would be great if the people who are using that entrance at the top were then walking their dogs back home, which by that point your dogs are going to be a bit more cleaned up.
In some of the initial discussions, the adding water to the site was listed as a pretty significant cost. Do we think we have enough to cover that now, given the other options that have been selected and proposed?
So this site, relative to other sites that were considered, has an existing water meter. So that's an easier addition for us as far as constructability. If we had to add another site, add a water meter, that could be almost a quarter of the budget, just in setting a water meter. So for this site, that is a lower cost to be able to add water because there is an existing water meter.
From the houses there previously, right?
Yeah.
Were you talking about water features? Because there was some comment about having that as an amenity somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I think we had even just talked about the Kapal wash station and a drinking fountain could be as much as $60,000 to run the meter and the lines and everything. And I see it represented in the proposed design, which is great, but I just wasn't sure if we had decided that.
We don't need the meter here, and that's the significant cost. Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about drainage? I mean, in terms of how that's been assessed and what would actually occur, or would it be something that would maybe be dealt with later after you really see what the issues are?
I think a
or-
bit of both. So, as is most dog parks, the materials just stay on site, absorb, rainwater and self-penetrate. It would be our goal to have minimal disruption to the site, to not alter the water flow of the site. However, if we did find as we start into the permitting processes, we needed to add a drain line in an area, we would certainly be dealing with that as part of the permitting process. So I don't foresee, with the level of development, the level of invasive removal and clearing, we're still retaining a lot of trees, and a lot of natural vegetation, that would eventually be replanted. I don't anticipate this being a huge water issue on the site.
Could you talk a little bit about future opportunity, that the large section in the middle?
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. I kind of skipped over that. So years and years and years ago, the Parks Department had dumped some extra soils in this unused portion of the park. Since that time, it has filled in with beautiful birch trees. And the wetland is on the interior of that mound that is self-created. So this is a man-made wetland, not a naturally occurring wetland. The future opportunity area per city code, it does allow for the removal, as Connie mentioned in her public comment, does allow for the removal of wetlands. However, you have to mitigate for those or in a future area. And so that would be dealt with as part of that future. If in due time, the community wanted to enlarge, this would be an area we could consider enlarging the dog park by addressing the mound and removing trees and potentially filling in the wetland. That is not what this proposal is. It's just identifying that is a potential area down the road that is not part of what we are currently proposing.
And could you share what you have in mind for fencing around this area?
So yeah, this area would be the split rail and chain link fencing.
And how high?
This area would likely be 4 foot, which, but the outside fences, more of a protection, we're recommending 5.
Both the chain link in the back
And the dimensional.
in the front would be
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
Am I correct, Jen, just for clarity for everybody, that wetland, was that wetland in that location created because of the spoils that were placed on that pad?
Correct.
Okay.
Essentially, it's not a natural wetland, to
Right.
clarify.
No, it came from the storage of soils there.
But as you mentioned, it can be filled in, it could be used for the park. I mean, it could be open area.
Eventually,
It could
but
be,
but
yeah.
with that would also be the removal of a lot of birch trees.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's an area we want to go down right now as we're looking at the site development. We're removing a few alders as part of this, as well as some apple trees, which we know will give dogs diarrhea, as well as a few dead and dying trees. So to remove a very large portion right now, as part of this initial design, has not been part of the conversation anywhere through any of the concepts that we've floated with the community. It's been to retain this area as is. It actually creates a nice little mound, a sense of privacy when you're out there walking around. If you've not been out there, put on some hiking boots. You can go out to the site right now and walk around. It's actually really nice. It creates a nice atmosphere by having that. And so you can be down here in this lower area of the dog park and have an experience and feel a little separate from this other area if you want to be playing up here in a more open area. And then by retaining some of the vegetation, you'll have these natural trails, and up in this area you can go exploring it too.
Could you talk a little bit about the shy dog area? First of all, where is the entrance to it?
There's a couple of entrances. One would be right here off of
So essentially where the entries are
Yeah.
would also be the entries too. So there's 2 entrances to that.
Correct.
then? Okay.
and from this one as well.
And then fencing for that would be what, dimensional?
All the dimensional.
5 foot?
Because it's so close to the street and the visuals in that area.
So now, also the dog park, the dogs are unleashed, right? Is that
Yes,
right?
that is the whole purpose,
You're right.
that they're off leash.
So on the paths there, on the right, what's the blue area there? So the dogs aren't leashed, so they're
This?
free. Know where that tan path is on the left-hand side?
This? Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's a path, but the dogs aren't leashed, so they can go where they want. So what's the blue on the other side? On the other side, the dogs can go where they want to, so
The blue, you mean right here? On this side?
I think he's talking between the path and the fence.
Oh, here?
And the fence.
That would just be existing vegetation that's out
Yeah,
there.
it's
Some
out
of it's
there.
invasive species, some of it's blackberry, sadly. But those would remain until such time that we have future volunteer efforts to replant and put in
There's
some native
there's
plants.
vegetation and stuff there. It's not
Correct.
open or something, or
It's pretty
So-
open out in the site, though.
So to clarify, because of all of that not being removed, I mean, this 2 acres really is not a usable 2 acres going into this. I mean, to some extent, a lot of that open space around the trails could be usable eventually, but not initially. Is that right?
Well, no.
Because there's too much invasives there to be having that be usable?
No, I think the whole site is usable within the fenced area. Dogs like to run where dogs like to run. If you've been to Beaver Lake Dog Park, they have a nice wooded area. They have areas that have blackberries. Dogs have made little tunnels. They'll go running and exploring in there and come back out to their owners. This would be the same type of situation. We have the larger fence outside, but this provides an opportunity too for us to go throw the ball, but also an opportunity for dogs to go exploring. And in time, this will take a little different shape and have a little different look and maybe a little more bark in due time. little more open space in due time, but this is what our proposed initial design would be going forward, which really talks to the responses received about the lighter touch on the site, as well as not, overdoing what's out there, because it is a unique environment.
What do they do with tree stumps when they take trees down? Do they actually pull the stumps out and grade it, or are they cutting it down below grade and then?
We haven't gotten there. We haven't gotten out there yet with the arborist as to what we're going to do. It'd be my hope some of the larger trees that we would take down, if they're decent enough quality, that we could still use them for some of the logs that are here on site. Leave them as exploratory features for the dogs, because we all know they love to jump up on a log and play king. And then some of the stumps might be left for sitting if they're healthy. Some may get ground out. So depending upon the health of the tree, the location, it could be a multitude of options as to how we're dealing with that.
A few observations through all this, and then also maybe some questions and requests. So just being a bit of a numbers nerd, looking at it, I think the wood chipped area is shown as maybe like 3/4 of an acre, around that. And then it looks like the sand gravel area is a little over 1/4 of an acre, and the shy dog area is maybe a little under, or maybe just about. Just to give some perspective, and then I thought about like the lot my house is on, and so that is pretty sizable. And it seems like some of the trails, the idea is that you could go in, the dog can run around in the openish area, and then you could maybe walk down a trail, and the dog might sort of more or less follow you and do its thing the way it likes to. So I guess I'm seeing that. Some questions and requests that I'd like to ask of the staff is, so it might make sense to provide a little clarification on the wetland rules, because there's a stated concern based on a state rule and a stated rule based on a city rule. And so maybe it'd be good to just elaborate on that and clarify that this is why the city has been authorized by the state to do this, and this is why it's a legal rule, and it's not violating anything, or it is. I believe even man-made wetlands are regulated, so that I think is why when you said if we were to use that area, if it was ever decided, you would have to mitigate it. But so that's kind of an important element. And then on the surfacing, I think what might be being overlooked here is that gravel can range from about this big to very big, and so what there will be greater detail done on selection of the types of sand gravel mix, and then also on the wood chip there might be different varieties that we might be envisioning big bark, but it's really something finer that is okay and is used at other dog parks. And then maybe for the drainage idea, probably what is anticipated is using dispersion. So from the areas that are developed or impacted, the runoff will go into the areas that remain vegetated, and it is therefore absorbed and distributed, dispersed, and infiltrated. So maybe just as a way to address some of these concerns, these are items to touch upon by next time.
Actually, I can address a couple of them now,
Okay,
if you
great.
would entertain me.
Sure.
So the wood chip is what is used at most of the various dog parks, and calling around and getting some estimates of quantities and pricing. The wood chip is what is vastly used out there. Hog fuel will be found at Beaver Lake Park if you go out there, which has the larger fibers in that. This would have a finer fiber, so your dog's not going to be picking up as much of that, the larger sticks and the other types of wood that can come in the hog fuel. And then the sand gravel mix, I believe we were looking at was it a 1/2 inch or less? Or a 3/4, quarter inch? Yeah, I think it was a 1/4 inch or less
With
sand mix. So it'd be a lot more softer for dogs to play in, and not a larger cobble.
Has anybody ever used like the rubber mulch or no?
Then we're really getting into a lot of,
It's expensive.
it's super expensive and permitting, and you get into treatment of,
Dispersion.
It's a different environmental issue. I would
yeah,
think.
there's a whole
If
different.
a little sand goes into the dirt next to it, it just becomes part of the dirt. But
Yeah, there's a lot of
Synthetic
issues
product.
regarding that. And then as far as the wetlands that are on site, I can just provide a little bit of clarity for those who would like to do research before our next meeting, and I'll come back with additional information. But the existing conditions report that was done, these are smaller than the 2,500 square foot. These are, or 2,000 square foot, and I think it was 2,500 square foot. They're unclassified wetlands, which does allow for their disruption or protection, which we had talked about at the meeting before last as well. So that's why they're marked up there as unclassified. So they are low-grade, low-functioning wetlands right now.
So is that city code or state code or what?
That's city code.
And like Chris was talking and Connie was talking, how does that differ from state requirements?
I don't know that offhand
We can
versus
find that
state,
for you.
but
We
I
can
do
find that at the
know.
next meeting. Happy to.
Yeah, I think I have.
No, thank you for those, Chris. We'll do a little bit more research to get you an answer on
Yeah.
that.
I don't have it with me, but I do have the wetland code at
Gonna have both codes
back
to
at the
Sandy.
office. Yeah. But it's for an unclassified wetland, just to let you know. Mhm.
For some of the lighter green areas where you said there are some invasive species
Mhm.
that may be in there, is the plan then for the city to kind of beat back the blackberries, or looking at the Friends group to help with that? Is it some combination of both?
Bit of both. I think initially out of the gate would be mostly for the developed areas that you see on here with the surfacing. But in due time, I think both. We do work parties out there, part of the ongoing Friends stewardship. We're really looking for the Friends to kind of have two roles. One would be to help with the construction, and the other to be for that longer ongoing stewardship and maintenance of the site. And the city would be partnering with that Friends group in that ongoing stewardship.
And that's really the best use of volunteer time, I think, is restoration projects. Mountain to Sound does so many of them around the area, and goodness, I think they had, 300 volunteers, I heard, at the state park recently.
And we
And
do a
that's
lot
some-
with them, too.
And that's something where we've had a lot of experience in organizing and coordinating as well.
Is there anything else that the board would like answered by the next meeting? Any questions that we can research and run down for you before we meet again on this topic?
Are there any additional changes you would like to see to this design before we put it out for additional comment?
Just other ideas of surfacing. I don't know. I've only heard the wood chips, the gravel, and the hog fuel thing. Is there anything else out there? Is that
Not
about
to,
it?
no, that's pretty much what's it at the,
Well, some other forms of bark. You mentioned bark, but wood chips isn't really bark. Bark is much more of a ground up material that you use.
so now we're.
But is that not used typically?
So there's various types of bark even too.
Well, I know, but
And-
your typical landscape bark is what I'm
I
talking about, which is
we
a
can
lot.
try and get a sample for next meeting if that would be helpful to the board.
Well, I think we can find a little more information on that if they want. Right?
Well, this was something that when we did the survey on the different concepts, there were images of the three types of materials that we were looking at. And one was the wood chips, which is a little finer. Then there's the hog fuel, which has a lot more fibrous, larger pieces within it. That tends to have a lot more organic material and holds a lot more water. And then the sand gravel mix, which is like you would see at Luther Burbank, a little more beachy feel of materials. Wood chips is what is used at most of the other dog parks for the running areas.
So it would be fair to say that wood chips were, the community wanted that the most.
Yes.
And it's also the most used at other dog parks.
Yep, and 45% of the survey results recommended the use of the wood chip.
So it's a standard way that dog parks are constructed here in the
Yes.
Pacific Northwest.
Correct.
There's no lighting planned for the internal.
No.
Is there a reason why we have sand and gravel and not just all one thing? Is there, what's the purpose of having sand and gravel, having two different types of surfaces?
It was to address community concerns heard in the concept feedback about splintering. So this was just an option to do a smaller area that perhaps had a different experience, but still address the needs of the community. So when you read the 200 survey responses in there, there was comments made, even though they might have still voted for a wood chip, there was still comment about, concerns about splintering or perhaps wanting a different surfacing, which is why we chose to try and introduce that. And as we float it back out to the community, if people don't want it there and say, get rid of the gravel, then we'll get rid of the gravel. Gravel sand mix.
Well, I mean, in the initial survey, you gave 3 options. And I guess the question is are there other options that are not being considered?
No. I think that was probably, hog fuel was the second most. But again, due to concerns with drainage issues, we wouldn't want to create anything that had the ability to pond or add additional moisture to the site. We want to encourage drainage, site drainage. So we opted to just continue with the recommended community preference of the wood chips.
One concern I have was we had a public comment last time saying that the current park here that has the wood chips, that none of the dogs are go on it. I mean, that was a statement that was made by somebody who talked, even though it's what is used, their observation was that that park where the wood chips are, there are no dogs because they don't like to be on it. I mean, now, is that just that person's view, or is that the 200 people in the survey? Did you get that? Or, I mean, has somebody gone and looked, I mean, so I'm going by what I've heard from people saying, too. Not just a survey, You have people who show up, but we have people that show up here who are viable to what they have to say, too, and the 13 people, the Friends thing, who come here, and there's not 500 people here, but, they have something to say as a concern.
So the sand gravel mix was in the design that was shown to the Friends group, and the same rationale that, it was to address concerns that were heard, that though wood chips were a high preference, that there was a desire for something else, and so we've chosen to show that. And they had no additional feedback at the Friends meeting
Has
regarding
anybody,
that.
Have you guys observed that at all?
So I
This
frequent
park?
dog parks a lot, just as a dog owner with a big dog who likes to run. And I guess I would, and this is again, it's my own anecdotal, so whether it's people up here or my own anecdotal, when I see up at the Highlands Dog Park or other dog parks, the dogs are running everywhere.
Are they on there? I mean,
They're
that's
everywhere.
your view too. Okay, I mean, that's.
And there might be a dog that has a preference, like I would never say like all dogs love all surfaces, because that's ridiculous, but I would also never say that it's a barren place where the dogs don't play. Like, I just don't see that.
That's why I'm just wondering if there's other observations that people have seen.
Well, and Carl, you'll want to, kind of go back in our memory bank and also on the dog park web pages. Back in 2015, we did a kind of a reconnaissance of what is out there at all the existing dog parks. We took a look at all the dog parks in the area, from Snoqualmie to Luther Burbank to Cedar River Dog Park down in Renton, Marymore, as to what they have in different surfacing, different construction techniques, fence height, fence types, all sorts of isms that made those parks unique and did an experience. And that survey is still up on the website. There are a mix of surfacing materials shown out there. However, these tend to be the most utilized surfacing materials for dog parks.
Would it be helpful to have a rough estimate of the approximate areas for sand, gravel, wood chips, and then everything else? Because, as I look at the map, it looks like over half of it is not wood chip surfacing, right? It's either the natural spaces or the sand and gravel.
Yeah, I have those back at the office. can certainly add those if they think.
So the approximate estimates just for the
Square
different
footage.
areas.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, I hear Carl's concern, but also just in looking at the map, it seems like there are a lot of other places, like if you wanted to just walk in the south side, where there is really no surfacing, there's just some trails and then the natural vegetation, or if you wanted a finer surface for sand and gravel, you would have either of those options if you didn't want the wood chips. Like the only place I see it being an issue is if you had a small dog, where there is only wood chips as an option. I don't know if that's something to address or not, but it seems like everywhere else you have them, a choice.
And just for a little clarity, Carl, just if it helps, and for everybody, just, as we take these in, know that this isn't like a Parks and Recreation design up there, because that wouldn't be a good thing, right? This is a community, when we take in all the community input, we're trying to assess what that looks like and what the community wants, right? So if we were just to sit down and draw one up, I guarantee you it would look totally different than that. But this has started with a concept, took it out to the community with a variety of options, right? Now this is the next iteration of that, saying, hey, after these 3 options, here's what we heard you saying you liked, and we're going to take it out again to go, did we get it right or did we not? Does this seem to resonate with you? This is what we heard from all this input and all the different designs we presented, and does this sort of reflect what we heard? Because that's really our job, is trying to get to a point where it reflects a little bit of everybody in that, right? That everybody has a little bit of a buy-in to what that design is, because that's truly what a good design is something that has a little bit of everybody's stuff in it, right?
Yeah, I'm just worried about it. It looks congested to me. I guess that'd be a good word.
Have you been to the site? I would recommend taking a visit if you've not been out
Yeah,
there.
I
And
think that's too bad.
some of the
because-
blackberries have been mowed down, and it's
Yeah.
really nice to go out there and walk around, yeah.
When you show that aerial view, it's like, it's like totally vegetation, trees,
Well,
I
and
know
some of
you-
that's blackberries that hadn't been mowed down.
It's still, I think of an open area for dogs.
I think one of the points of confusion is, if you've only been to Marymore and a few parks like that, you see the flat land type park.
Right, yeah.
This is quite unique and quite different.
And
I
that's
mean,
a-
I've walked it 3 or 4 times. I'm not a dog owner, but if I was, I think it'd be a good dog park. But it doesn't resemble anything else around here, because whatever land was available was available. So I think it's a very usable dog park. It's not Marymore, and it's not some of the other ones we've seen that don't have any trees on them.
It seems like we kind of want to discourage people from parking in the neighborhood to some extent, and encourage them to go through the parking lot. What was the idea behind having 2 entry points along a road that we don't want to necessarily encourage them? Could we just have 1 entry point in the middle between those 2 and maybe save some money?
So when you look at this design here, there was in some of the outreach and when we did the site walk and talks, there was discussion about wanting access at this crossing, because there's actually a curb at the neighboring street
Inniswood.
right here, Inniswood. So this would be a direct crossing for them, which would then give them, if there were other dogs over here they wanted to avoid, this would provide a separate entrance for them to go into if they just wanted to go into the shy dog area, or they come in here. So that was one of the discussions there. And then really the community asked, one of the proposals did not have this in the concepts, did not have this upper entrance, and that was largely talked about, that they would really like to see an entrance further up 12th for people who are coming down the neighborhood, that they don't have to walk all the way down the hill only to get into the dog park and walk back up.
It just seems like a lot of accommodation for a very small percentage of the community, where if you put one in the middle, you could still, if you were that incentivized to not go into the one that's right there, you could still walk halfway up or walk halfway down. That's just my thought, but.
Well, we also wanted to provide a service access, which we have in here. So we have that a little more central, where there's a flatter access area. You can see from the grade lines in here to allow vehicles to get in there if and when we need to for adding of bark chips or anything, which is why we didn't place the entrance right at the same location. Moved it up just a little bit more to provide a little barrier between the 2. But very good point.
So at what point do you think you'll be able to have some cost items? I mean, after permitting or when? you?
Bit of both. I mean, we've been taking a look at that, and cost has always been part of this entire process, even when we put forth the concepts. You know, we've been trying to balance the cost with how much willingness the community is wanting to put into this
So
as
do
far
you-
as a
do you
bill.
have a better feel for the community build part of
I
this?
think we do after the last meeting, and please, for those park board
I
members that were
didn't,
there.
I didn't get a whole lot out of that last meeting that says there's gonna be a whole lot of community building of this.
What I
Other than
heard.
potentially some labor assistance,
Mhm.
maybe.
So I think we were hoping to maybe get someone who had some concrete experience or fence building experience, and from the community members there, I think they were hesitant to want to help participate in those heavier construction efforts. However, I did hear a very strong willingness for people to want to go out and help prepare the site, help remove invasives, help spread, help do some minimal planting, and help do things that volunteers can do and that we have a lot of experience doing. And so we've been working with that, and we'll continue to work with that. We're going to be working with city administration and moving forward. And then also there are a bunch of unknowns yet as we go through the permitting process that we will need to address as well. So we're getting there, and we're working with city administration, but we do definitely feel the proposal before you is somewhat doable with our existing budget, and we'll be continuing to try and stretch those dollars as much as we can with community input, and we'll be chatting with administration as we move forward.
So I know your first thing on Plan A, which did not include as much of an open space area, you said that the budget afforded would pay for all of that. Now that we're kind of doing a little bit of a combination, I guess the question is, what does the budget look like in terms of being able to build this as is?
You know-
Or if we don't have enough money, where do things start having to be backed off of this for some future effort?
And that's a great question, and ones we are continuing to explore. You know, I would say, just to play into April's comment here, if we saw budget was an issue, I would recommend permitting this additional entrance, but maybe we don't build it right away. But I would include it in the design to get the permit, you know, authorization for it, and it may be a later addition. We're working with administration. We'll continue to work with the Friends group. You know, just because we met one time, that wasn't it. We're going to be meeting a lot more as we start, should you recommend this site, as we start moving forward with the construction plan and how we're going to get these dollars forward and see what we can do. There was one member at the, we had a conversation afterwards at the Friends group, works at Costco. Let me know. I'll rally some of my friends and troops. And so we might be able to get some extra effort that wasn't even voiced that night. And so there's a lot of unknowns and variables that we are constantly, this has been a moving target all the way through the design process. Every time we have more community outreach, we learn more about what the expectation is. This has never been a design, here's 200,000, here's your site, go build it. Design, bid, build, you know, we didn't even know a site when that budget was set. And so we've been working and trying to massage this, the entire process, as every time we get community input, the project changes a little bit. And so we're trying to be super respectful of the budget, spread it as far as we can with additional community effort. And if we find as we get a little further into it, you know, we'll be working with administration if we should need additional dollars for doing that. However, I think what's before you is a very doable concept. It's not all the bells and whistles that were in Concept C, though, you know, some people had really liked the agility elements. I think the majority of people didn't feel they were really necessary. So I think this is a respectful, thoughtful, moderate impact design that really does address the community's concerns.
So I just want to say one thing, and that is, I don't think that this dog park, or that the process of this should be based upon the lowest cost dog park that you can put in any different facility. Because there's actually probably maybe some other areas that we could put a dog park that might not have some of the challenges that this one has, and you might actually be able to build it cheaper. But is it in a location that is as good as this one? I mean, one of the reasons that this was selected, I think, has an awful lot to do with the central aspect of it, where the growth is expected to occur, into the future with the Central Issaquah plan. So the location of this is important. And also, you've got to look at a situation of infrastructure, which I think had an awful lot to do with this particular location. Parking lots, bathrooms, a lot of the other areas that we looked at didn't have those things. And if you start trying to, pay for that kind of stuff, you eat up your budget really quickly, and you don't have maybe any money left over to do anything within for amenities in the dog park. So, I mean, I think you have to look at that big picture part of it when we're saying, oh, is this the place, or do we, try for something else? Because I think, one of the other second options is, over by the community center. It's only half an acre. Yeah, it's all flat. It's all grassed out. You could probably build that. You could put a really great dog park in there for $200,000, but it's too small, and it's not centrally located. But it does have some of the infrastructure issues. So I mean, it's a real challenge to try and to look at something like this, and everybody wants, well, look at cost as being the determining factor as to where you put it. I think you have to look beyond that, because I know people are thinking of that. Maybe this is going to be too expensive for what we end up with, but the fact that you have a water meter, the fact that you have a bathroom, the fact that you have a parking lot, those are huge big ticket items that this site provides. And if it gets to a situation where that $200,000 doesn't get everything that you want, well, then it just has to be phased in, or a friends group has to, put together some ways of getting some of this stuff done. But does that $200,000 get you at least the huge basics, like like your fencing, and like your trail system, and like some of your open flat areas, and it seems that it does do that. So I just kind of want to put that out there for people who are thinking cost, because I know we've thrown that out a number of times. Cost is not the total item here as to whether this is a selected spot or not, in my opinion.
Maybe when you do present the cost analysis, maybe you include the items that you might have to do at another site, like water meter. A service connection has thousands of dollars costs, parking, so forth.
Yeah. And a lot of that will come out as we go further down the process. Yeah, most certainly. We will be sharing.
I have another question. So in the depiction here, it says the Art Commission is interested in contributing an art element to this project.
Yes.
What ideas were mentioned or suggested?
So I've only had cursory conversations. We've been thinking maybe something at the entries or something along
The
12th
gates or something
Avenue,
like that,
knowing community concern of the image. So we don't know yet. We haven't commissioned an artist to help with that. So it's only been cursory conversations. But if anyone else has any other ideas, those are kind of what we thought of, some gateways or entry points, something exciting that make you know that you've entered the site, or along 12th Avenue or something we talked about, just because of the natural nature of the site. But who knows? Maybe something else will come of that.
Jen, does that usually go through a public process as well when you're picking out art or not?
Usually the Arts Commission, they'll send out a call for an artist, and then the Arts Commission will pick an artist to work with.
The gates and entries do seem like a great opportunity for that. You have all this fencing and a lot of sort of very mundane materials that you're using, and then
Natural.
but a chance to give it a sense of place that people might really look to and enjoy.
Mm-hmm. So I will
Mind of Don Fells will be needed on this.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Don, if I've mentioned his name a time or two, but he's actually working with Methuen on all these sites to integrate art, public art, and interpretive elements. So
Did the paddles
he did, yes.
at Lake Sammamish State Park?
Yeah. All right then. Well, we will be sending this concept out if there's no other,
So you're expecting a survey to come out with this, this week, next week?
yeah, soon,
With a 1
soonish.
week kind around or something? So
Yeah,
we-
probably a 2-week turnaround, just for, hey, here's the informed, thank you for your comments on the preliminary concepts. Did we get it right? Any final comments, and see what comes back with that.
Be good for us to see that before the next meeting if possible, rather than to have to digest it at the meeting. So
Yep.
everybody can have a look-see.
Yeah,
Consider
but
it.
those are likely going to be more design-focused and not site. Should we proceed with the site construction-focused
Yeah.
conversations? But yes, happy to send and share those with you. It would be our goal to get those back in time.
Any other comments, questions from the board? Not. I'd like to open it up for public comment at this point. So have at it. You could please state your name and your association with the city and
Hi, my name is Joe Verner. I live off of Newport Way Northwest. And about 3/4 of a mile doorstep to parking lot of the proposed new dog park. I followed the surveys and answered the questions, and signed up on the Friends of the Dog Park list. And was glad to have an opportunity to go to that first meeting earlier this month. Was a little disappointed that of what I thought might have been 100 or so people signed up for Friends, we had a measly 13. And then we have notification for tonight's meeting. We have just 2 of us. So here's an opportunity, Parks Department, not board, but the Parks Department, to sell this Friends business feverishly. One thought. As I listened tonight, and I also listened at the Friends meeting, we're talking about cost. Well, we don't know what this will cost. We don't know what that'll cost. We can use Friends of the Dog Park for labor, maybe supplies. Well, I don't think you can, because there's an insurance issue there. To have Joe Citizen come out on behalf of the Parks Department and do physical labor, other than maybe scratching with a rake or a hoe or cutting down invasive plants. But if you say, Joe, I want you and your buddies to go dig post holes and build a fence. Now, I'm not a professional. Corey's not a professional fence builder. That's a misuse and a misdirection, in my opinion. Let the professionals do it, and you contract it out. So now we're getting into cost. Third thing. I'm hearing we don't know what the cost is. We don't know what the cost would be. Brad, you mentioned at the Friends meeting, it's time we get a cost estimate, detailed. What's it going to cost to put in the sand and the gravel? What's it going to cost to put in the trail per the proposal? What's it going to cost in materials and labor to build the fence? Yada, yada, yada. I think you have to have that. How in the dickens will you make a decision next month, 30 days from now, of, yeah, we approved this? You haven't a clue what the cost is. Maybe the cost is $500,000. Well, you at least know that going into it. And you only have $200K to start with. So what doesn't get done? And you can't tell what doesn't get done until you find out what the total cost is going to be and add inflation. Thank you.
thank you.
I'm not criticizing, I'm just pointing things out.
Corey Christensen, Squawk Mountain. So I'd like to start out by saying I thought that the flow chart was a nice addition to the packet. I thought that was good. But I'd also like to echo Joe's comment about price and numbers. People have been asking that since the August meeting a year ago. How much do the basic things cost? So the most basic things here, fencing, bear-proof garbage cans, benches, all these things are things that you guys put in all the time. We don't need to have down to the exact number, but we need approximate numbers. And the 200,000 build number, that is the only number we have ever gotten out of you guys. And it isn't really 200,000 anymore because you've spent money on consultants, so it's less than that. And so we need to be looking at the bare bones costs of the bare bone things that we know, and not numbers that we're necessarily going to hold you right exactly to, but you know how much the garbage cans and the benches cost. I don't understand why that can't be out on the table. Then the elephant in the room here also is the mound of dirt, the wetlands, and the water in the middle, because you can scrimp on putting around the outer, the barest bones things. But this is not going to be a very good dog park with just that. Immediately, people are going to be asking for more, and so what we need to be looking at is what is the total cost. Now, those are going to be a little bit harder to estimate, but and I'm not suggesting we do that right at the beginning, but is this a $500,000 dog park or $1 million dog park? And I'm talking about when you add in the phases of things. And I'm not necessarily talking about things like agility things that are more optional, but the actual making enough room to have a functioning dog park there. And that is going to be moving the mound of dirt and moving at least that center wetland. And that costs a lot of money to do all that, but we need to be knowing that right from the beginning, because once people start using this park, they're going to be looking around and they're not going to be satisfied. And I think you just have to understand that the user experience is something that you've not been looking at and is going to be important. And the people that aren't coming doesn't mean that they don't care. People absolutely care about a dog park, but they're going to be comparing the Issaquah dog park to every other dog park around here. And it, for what you're proposing, does not remotely stack up to any of the dog parks that are in our immediate area. Now, I thought Carl had some really great points. Now, some of the things he brings up, in my experience in looking at dog parks for essentially 30 years, is not wrong, but not right, because one of the things that varies with dog parks is size matters. For example, in Marymore, where they have 40 acres, you can have trails, open grass, and you don't have the same intensity of use as you do in a small dog park. Now, Marymore even has intensity, and they fence off their areas to do to manage the site. But the smaller the dog park, and when we're talking even down to the size that we're looking here, that are Beaver Lake, Robbinswood in Bellevue, and Luther Burbank and Mercer Island, all in the 2 to 3 acre range, that intensive use, if you're talking about grass, there won't be a blade of grass left. And matter of fact, all three of those dog parks, when they initially opened, had acres of grass, and immediately within 3 weeks they're filling it with more bark chips, total bark chips, and then they find that the bark chips don't work, and the remodels of those dog parks, leaving Beaver Lake out because it has not been remodeled, but both Luther Burbank and Robbinswood both went to sand, gravel sand. At Luther Burbank, in the entirety of sand, Robbinswood in the area where the most intensive use is. The problem we're going to have here, until you move that wetland and resculpt that whole area, because of the slope here, you're going to constantly have problems of the stuff, whatever material you use, sliding. One of the problems with bark chips and hog fuel, it's fine for trails, but for the intensive use areas, the problem is the pee and poop soak into it, and you end up having problems where the dogs get that on their feet and then get it inside them, and you end up having basically a biohazard. That's one of the problems that Beaver Lake Park has right now. And the problem with the dog park is there are all of these problems that you're going to find once you start once you let the ball roll. And my fear is that you're going to have more problems than success points. And I think that Carl makes the point Carl is actually bringing up that I think is important is that all of this surveying, it's relevant, but it's not relevant because people don't necessarily know as much as you would know if you're a park planner or if you were looking at the professionals that design these things that know that, okay, small dog park, we have to be careful because if we set up a scenario where there's too much water, too much dampness, dogs get sick, and so on and so forth. So there's a balance of the different types of field surface, terrain, all of that needs to come into play. And frankly, I don't think we've done a very good job of comparing and contrasting what other cities have done, what mistakes they've made, what they've done to correct those mistakes. And the corrections cost a lot of money. Mercer Island spent $1 million, not just on their dog park, but on the area of Luther Burbank Park that the dog park is in to correct all these things. And it's an expensive thing. So I'm skeptical about this site because I don't think we've done enough deep digging and looked at the actual cost, the total, and I mean the total amount when we're talking about phasing things out what is the end point? We need to look at that and start working backwards. So I think we need to be doing that before we decide on this particular dog park. Maybe it still passes and maybe it's still a reasonable place to have a dog park. I don't know, but I think that it's probably something that needs a stronger look. I actually think you need numbers. You also need to be looking at these critical area reports and on the water because the water on the property is not purely from the mound putting water down. There's water moving on the property as well, just either on the surface, springs like that. Any of you that live on Squaw Mountain know that there's going to be water. Not saying we know where it is, but we're going to be finding out where it is. So I think we need to be learning more, making a more informed decision, especially with the cost numbers, and then hopefully make a decision based on that. Maybe this is still the place to build it, maybe not. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. So, for now, I think we've used our dart park.
Yeah.
I know that we've left a lot of time for these other two items here, but this is such an important piece of business that we needed to spend the time. So
And we'll spend as much time as need be discussing that, so everybody's comfortable. That's important piece.
Plus, I didn't have numbers here to be looking at for these different three things to see when the cutoff was. Not that I would be cutting people off, but.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think,
But either one of these other two items aren't really big time crunch.
no, we can go through them quick enough, and like I said, there won't be a director's report either. And that's Jeff says hello to everybody. He is at budget discussions tonight, so that's why he is not here tonight with us. You want me to move into the quick budget report?
2020 budget.
Just so everybody's aware, we've been, every year, city prepares our budgets, right, looking into the next year. As the city was doing that with our budget, and started looking to next year's budget, they, recognized and projected a $5.2 million, deficit that needed to be made up for, right? So I don't know if anybody's been watching any of the budget discussions. They're all online. You can, some pretty long meetings, but you're welcome to go take a look at them. So with that projection of $5.2 million, the mayor had worked with all the city departments and put together, because when she presents her budget, it's a balanced budget, right? So we had to work together to come to, how do we balance this, right? So what was done was a combination. Her budget is presented with a combination of increased revenues along with some decreased expenditures, right? So it was about a 50-50 mix to reach that $5.2 million. She proposed that to the council on, I think it was September 24th. That's when it went to them. Our parks, so that was all city, right? That was the whole city came up with that $5.2 million. Everybody did their part in that with the revenues and expenses. as far as our Parks and Recreation Department, just so you sort of got a flavor for what our department did and what it looked like, is we increased our revenues by, raising some, we're looking at doing $120,000 increase in revenues through 3 different mechanisms. One is at the pool, and we're proposing charging a resident and a non-resident rate fee structure, right? So the whole department has a resident, non-resident fee structure with the exception of the pool. And that goes back to when the pool was transferred to the city back in 1996. It had a condition within the deed and the interlocal agreement that said the fees couldn't be changed for any users, whether they resided in the city or not. We've been working and talking with King County. They're very open and amiable to making that, we're working on an amendment to change that deed and that interlocal agreement. We've also proposed increasing the Gold Pass by a bit to help, the Gold Pass has been Gold Pass is a drop-in pass to use the community center and pool. It has been $25 a year since 2009, so we're proposing an increase to that. Also, we have some other fees, modest increases to some different, we have a pass fee that hasn't been increased in, well over 10 years, just for the general passes to the community center and pool, and we have a modest increase there, along with some other program increases. As far as expenditures, we're looking to reduce our expenditures by $180,000. Perspective, our department budget's about $10 million. We have 7 business units within the Parks and Recreation Department, so that is spread across the 7 different business units that we have within our division, right, or our department. There's been 5 council budget work sessions on these. Like I said, one is now they're in deliberations, which tonight is the second night of deliberations, where they're really, gosh, I've heard this term used a lot, is sausage making, right? So they're in the middle of sausage making. You got the balanced budget. What do you want to keep in? What don't you? Does this sound good? That's where council's really working through with all the different departments of what they would like to see come out of this budget process. And then hopefully the budget is looking to be approved November 18th, I think, is the date they've set. It can go longer, but they set a target date for November 18th, but it could go into December, and it often has. So it's not a big deal if it does. Just means they want to have a little bit more discussion around the different items. Any questions? That's a real broad overview because there's a lot of intricacies in that, which some are being discussed tonight. Yeah.
You're not anticipating cutting any staff, right?
That is not on the table right now, yes.
Good.
I hope that stays that way, yes. Good question.
Any other questions about budget? Thanks for that, Brian. So Jen, you're going to give us a little update on site master plans?
Sure.
Okay.
So, as you all may recall, and for some who haven't been at some meetings for a while, is we've been master planning 3 of our major parks: Veterans Memorial Field, Tibbetts Valley Park, and the Creek Corridor. We spent a lot of the summer doing engagement and site analysis. We went to farmers markets. We went to concerts on the green and gathered a lot of input from the community. We've also been here park board sharing some of our findings with that outreach. Right now, the consultant team is packaging up all that material and starting to come up with some design options. They're working internally right now. We're going to have an internal work session with them here in the next month. And then after the new year, after the holidays, we'll be sharing publicly what those design options are, likely in both survey format as well as a community meeting to chat about the proposals and go from there. So while things have been quiet, there's been a lot happening behind the scenes with our consultant team in doing that work. Also, as we move forward, we've talked about these projects, though all the engagement has happened simultaneously. This next round of options is all going to come out together, and then after that, we're likely going to be breaking up with the 2 parks kind of going down their own path, and then the Creek Corridor coming down its own path. So the goal is still to try and create and adopt these master plans next year. But super excited that the next round of options will be coming out here soon after the holidays. You know, a lot of the engagement work that was done along the way really asked for what some of those precedent photos and images and things people would like to see. And so they've really been digesting all of that information, and look forward to seeing what they come up with. So more to come. Once we get an updated schedule, I'll be sure to share that with you.
So to clarify, you said this next public engagement will have all three of them together
Correct.
still?
Yeah.
And it won't be until after that they break them out?
Correct. Just because of where we kind of are in process, it makes sense. We're able to get all three options together, and we will definitely be taking those out. But then after that, that next level, once we get feedback on some of the options and we start creating a preferred plan, that's when we'll really be separating them out and having more focused conversation.
What kind of timeline are we looking at for them to have the proposal done?
Looking probably May, June-ish right now, but that also depends on some of our processes and engagement. If we find we need to slow something down or speed it up, we've kind of really only solidified into January, February right now on what we're talking about schedule, with the future steps still a little unknown because there's still a lot of variables in there. So, more to come.
Any questions, comments about master planning?
Can I clarify something real
Sure.
fast? You asked about staff, and I just want to be clear. On our expenditure reductions we do have an empty facilities lead position that is currently empty, and we are looking to hold that one empty through the remainder of next year as well as part of our expenditure reduction. So it wasn't any staff, but it's holding a position vacant in order to help meet our goals for the budget.
Vacant is much better than reduction. Anytime.
I agree.
How long's that actually even been open? That's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been open a good portion of this year. But with that, you know, with the projections going in next year, that's part of the reason why it was held as well.
You said no director's report tonight?
Nope.
So I guess it's just me, because we have no youth here still. You get a youth person here. Any word
Yeah,
on
we've been
that?
talking with the Youth Advisory Board. Right now, we don't have anybody that's stepping up to want to be on the board. It's sort of they're involved in a variety of boards and commissions as volunteers, so it's really up to the youth. If they show an interest in a board or commission, then they join it, and we've always had interest. Right now, we don't have interest right at this point in time, but that's not to say that along the way, somebody might not become interested in it, so.
A couple things that I'd want to say. So our next meeting is scheduled for November 25th, which is the week of Thanksgiving. That's just a few days before Thanksgiving. So we should have a little powwow here to discuss whether or not we want to hold that date or revise that date. The one in December is actually just a couple days before Christmas, and so I think we're probably not going to have a meeting in December, which we typically don't. I guess the open for discussion is, do we hold the November 25th meeting what we have, or do we push that ahead into the first part of December or not? Any thoughts from anyone? The 25th is a Monday, Thanksgiving's that Thursday. I personally don't see a real problem in holding the 25th still. Anybody have any comments one way or the other?
Will we need to vote on anything during that meeting?
Yes, that's when we're going to make the recommendation on the dog park, yeah.
It'd be nice to have a good showing.
Well, that's the other thing, yeah. We don't want to be, a quorum for us is 4 people, and we don't want to be making this recommendation based on 4 people. I mean, we're only missing 3 tonight, so that's a pretty good turnout. But I mean, I certainly would like to at least have a majority here, and have at least as many as we have here for our next meeting.
Maybe you could serve pumpkin pie.
because we're going to need that after Thanksgiving.
Well, my history is always the person that makes those recommendations is the person that brings the pie.
And I might not like the way I
Well,
made it.
just kidding, Carl.
I buy it at Safeway.
Any objections to holding it on the 25th? I mean, is everybody pretty good with being around and doing it then? Okay. Let's do it the 25th. We'll have it then. And stay plugged into the dog park thing since we are going to be making a recommendation in the next meeting. So if you need to go back in and take a look at things, look at certainly this next survey that Jen puts out here in a few weeks. I think that'll be a real key element. Hopefully we have a good turnout with that. I know in response to your concern, Carl, it sure be nice to have a lot more people participate. But it's better to have some than none, and we just have to go with it.
Yeah, that was something I brought up, when I first joined this committee, 5 years ago, was your tactics of surveying. I'm familiar with statistics and stuff like that in my background, and what kind of techniques do you have? And this is before Jen came on too. And you just talk about what they are, the internet and mailers, all that kind of stuff. But if you look at how you can survey people and get a higher response, how do you get that? That may your tactics or the way that you not everybody's going to access the internet,
Right.
Flyers, it costs money. I don't know. What other ways are there? That's something that made me think about this stuff.
Well, the peak democracy tool is something relatively new that the city's trying to use for surveys. So I think that that's still evolving in terms of the best use of getting community input. Before peak democracy, was pretty slim in terms of what you got, and you don't want to just base it on a couple people in a meeting or a couple emails here and there. So at least, a couple hundred people, quite frankly, is probably more than what we've had advantage of in the past to try and make decisions on. So, and the last thing I wanted to mention in your packet, I put, or had Melissa, thank you for adding this. The state park is going through a master planning process. I've mentioned it before. And there's a group of concerned and very experienced trail builders involved that have put together this initial trail plan for the Lake Sammamish State Park. Just wanted to have everybody have a look-see at it. This is actually going to be a proposed trails plan that's going to the state park planners to be incorporated as a part of their master planning process. So at least it gives you kind of a look-see in terms of what is going on over there intentionally. And there's already been some discussions in terms of some of the key points of where the state park meets up with Issaquah parks down in the southern tier of that over there, kind of by Costco. So I just wanted to have everybody at least have an opportunity to see that there's some other things going on at the state park, and that's one of the more significant things that the Friends group has actually been wanting to get moving for a number of years, and so this group has done a great job in putting this together. So. April.
I have one more question about the dog park. Sorry.
All right.
I was wondering if there's an estimate on how many dogs/dog people pairs that this could accommodate.
I don't have an estimate on that. However, relative to similar dog parks in the area, Beaver Lake Dog Park is an approximate size. Same with the Issaquah Highlands Bark Park, they call it. That too is also the 2-acre size. So for those who have been out there and visited, in some of our research that we've done in discussion with other cities, typically anywhere from 8 to 12 people tends to be visitation at any one time during peak visitation. So knowing there's other times that it could peak or be less, but usually that was at their peak time, 8 to 12.
Seems like this could easily.
Very easily, yeah. With 2 acres, that's a lot of space to walk around.
So we need to get some statistics going, might be helpful for the future.
There's no such fire code or anything, okay? You get 50 or more, you gotta evacuate.
Any other comments, questions? If not, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.